Let's talk about pelvic floor relaxation. I'm Dr. Nichelle Gurley and I'm specialized in prenatal and postnatal movement. The pelvic floor is something that we don't want to be too tight. We want there to be tone and appropriate ways of engagement, but we don't want it to be too tight. Now, a period of time in life when we absolutely don't want it to be too tight is during pregnancy, because to deliver a baby, to birth our baby, we need a toned pelvic floor, but not a tight pelvic floor, because it's not a tight, overly cagled pelvic floor that pushes a baby out. In fact, it's a pelvic floor that knows how to release and relax. It is a relaxed pelvic floor that can release, that can more easily allow for the exit of our babies. So let's talk about pelvic floor relaxation. It can be helpful to know how to engage the pelvic floor to then also be able to relax it. So I like to give an example of a toot because everybody toots, right? So you are going to have an engagement of the pelvic floor, an activation, which is like, oh my goodness, someone's around. I got to hold the toot in. That's that engagement of the pelvic floor. Then there's that neutral pelvic floor that's like, I'm home by myself, no one's around, and a toot just comes out. You're not holding it in, you're not pushing it out. That's neutral. Now, let's say you're about to walk into a party and you're like, oh man, I have a toot. Well, then you might actively push it out, which is a bulging of the pelvic floor. And it's healthy for a pelvic floor to be able to do all three, to hold in, go to neutral, bulge out. So activate, neutral, bulge. So all three are great, but we need to know how to use them appropriately. And a lot of times it's the relaxation that we have a hard time working on because we don't commonly sit in that space. And a lot of people hold tension in their pelvic floor. So if you think this is you, seeing a pelvic floor PT can be absolutely essential to helping you during pregnancy to ease that process of labor and birth, but also for a lot of other conditions that can happen due to having a tight pelvic floor. But I'm going to give you a few cues now as to how to try to relax that pelvic floor. So first off, it can be nice to take a nice deep breath in. And on the exhale, try to just allow your body to sink into that pelvic bowl. If you can think of your anus, it's really tight because it's trying to hold things in and we want it to. We want it to function and be held close. But I want you to think about the start to a bowel movement or the start to releasing a toot and how that sphincter can open. So playing around with that. You may not feel comfortable playing around with that unless you're on the toilet, but if you're on the toilet, that's fine. Play around with that slight opening of that pelvic floor, which is allowing you to know that you're allowing that pelvic floor to release, which is different than you actively pushing for bowel movement to come out. So some people like to think of that anus as like an opening, a flower that's blooming. I like to also think about my breath when I inhale driving into that pelvic bowl. So again, we're not going to be pushing down and bearing down as if we're allowing a toot or bowel movement to come down and out, but we're just bringing that air, that inhale into that pelvic bowl down in this region here. Positions that can be helpful are going to be different for everybody. A lot of people really like being on hands and knees on all fours. This can be helpful. Some people need the extra cue of putting your knees in and your feet out, which is internal hip range of motion. You're moving your hips internally and driving that breath in. A lot of times if you're pregnant, to be able to truly relax, you need to just allow that belly to sink and relax. Allow your shoulders to relax. So letting all your body relax and then drive that air into that pelvic bowl. So that position can be helpful. Some people really do well with child's pose and driving that breath into that pelvic bowl, thinking about the anus as a flower blooming. Other positions that can be helpful are being on your back in a supine butterfly frog position here. Other people, just a wide stance with their knees up. Some like to do happy baby. That's helpful for them. You can do happy baby when you're pregnant if it's hard to reach up because of your belly behind your hamstrings, so behind your knee on your hamstrings. And this can be a really relaxing position for people as well. The biggest thing for pelvic floor relaxation is also being able to get your mind to relax, which is also important for labor and birth. But when you're practicing, thinking about, I'm going to take 5 to 10 deep breaths, thinking about air filling up my pelvic bowl, visualizing the slight opening of the sphincter. And again, it's not really opening because you're not opening and pushing something out, but you're just starting to release that. So for some people, again, it might be helpful to go into the toilet first and feel that opening and closing of that sphincter without pressing. But some people are worried that they might toot or that like something else might happen. So it can be feeling safer to be on the toilet. But if you've already tried that or you feel pretty good about it, come onto the floor, try different positions out, visualize that release of the space between your sits bones, your pubic bone, and your tailbone. And then also know that it can take time. If you're having a really tough time, though, finding connection to activate or to relax pelvic floor, again, a pelvic floor PT could be a really helpful person to have on your team.